welcome back, or welcome if you are new to my booktube channel, Goddess of Gore. My name is Vix and I like to talk about horror, thriller, sometimes fantasy and occasionally sci-fi books every week. Not every week, that's far too much. Time is getting on, so it can only be my July reading wrap-up. And as I said last time, I didn't read very much this month, but you know what? What I did read, I loved. So this is going to be a fairly quick wrap up with just 8 books to get to. But regardless, we better get on with it. As always, I will go through the books in the order I read them, pick my top 3 reads of the month, and which was the biggest surprise, good or bad. So the first book I read, or rather listened to this month, was Whisper Down the Lane by McLoed Chapman. And I have to say that although I wasn't blown away by the book in its horrorness, I found it to be a middle of the road mystery thriller, twisty turny book, so I could see this appealing to someone who wasn't after anything too spooky, but wanted to get a retro read with the satanic panic feels and the snowballing web of lies that this book has to offer. So although it wasn't anywhere close to being a new favourite of mine, I wasn't offended by the author, and I will be reading more from him to see what he has to offer. So this follows 2 timelines of a young boy called Sean, the new boy at school, and he very much wants to please his teachers and the other grown-ups in his life because he loves his mother very much and she works so hard and she's always so tired, so he tries to be a good boy and do what everyone expects him to do. He tells one little lie about his teacher, and before you know it, the whole of the school is being run by a satanic gang and they're corrupting the little children of Greenfield, Virginia. The authorities interview the children with leading questions, which was all rather infuriating to listen to. The past scripted interviews by so-called experts, this was easy to see how things got out of hand in the 80s during the now infamous satanic panic hoaxes. The next timeline is of Richard, who is a grown teacher without a past. He lives with a single mother of a young boy who is a pupil at his school. As we find out through the book, Richard has a secret that someone knows all about and they're not going to let him get away with it. Oh, I should add, I listened to this for free on Audible at the time, so if it's still available and you are a member, then you should listen to it too. Next, I finished another audiobook, and this was another one from my folk horror recommendations list up here, and that was The Ritual by Nevill. As I previously mentioned, I had already watched the Netflix film and I already thought I knew what was going to happen, but they do differ from each other at various points of the book and the film. I thought this was a very well written book and I will be looking forward to getting to more Nevill. This is a modern day folk horror about a group of old university friends who find out how little they have in common as they get together for a hike in the untouched Scandinavian forest. As they go deeper in, they get lost and come across what they thought was an old cabin. But this isolated little house is home to something older, something ancient, and it wants them one by one. They get picked off. This was wonderfully gory. There was sacrifices and deaths at every turn in the cover of the trees. And as I said, if you watch the film and think you know the book already, then you should think again, because it's definitely worth a listen. Next, I read another first-time author to me, and this was The Book of Cold Cases by Simone St.James. So, this was a strange book. Don't get me wrong, it was pretty good, easy to read and all that jazz that I like in my books. but it wasn't what I was expecting. It was rather genre bending. I thought I was getting a mystery thriller, and it turns out to be a bit of a haunted house. It follows very nosy Shay as she recognises one of the clients, Beth, that comes into the doctor's office where she works behind the reception desk. In a rather dull life, talking about true crime on her blog since the recent split from her marriage. Beth was very much in the public eye in the 70s when she became the infamous suspected lady killer, a rich socialite, what we in the UK would have called an it girl. I don't know why, but that was the name the tabloids coined. And she didn't seem too surprised when Shay followed her from the doctor's one day and asked if she could interview her. As the book unfolds, we find out more about the unfortunate life of Beth and her family and the house she cannot leave, but also about Shay and her early life that formed who she is today. The House of Salt and Sorrow by Erin A. Craig was next, and this is a classic case of why did I leave it so long on my shelf? I seem to keep saying this all the time, but I do like a good dark fairy tale, and this was perfect. Erin A. Craig's writing was beautiful, it was moody and gothic, it was imaginative and magical. Set on a tiny damp island in a sprawling, crumbling mansion called Highmore, we are told a tale by Anna Lee, one of 12 daughters. We pick up the story when 4 of her sisters have already died, and it seems there will be more deaths before the book is finished, since the village gossip is that the girls are cursed. The deaths of the girls are easily explained as accidents, but Anna Lee cannot and will not believe this. She and the other sisters are visited by ghosts and spooks, and they follow clues to a magical doorway that takes them to extravagant ballrooms where they can dance the night away with masked suitors. Anna Lee keeps her wits about her, though, and doesn't give in to these late night urges to get all dressed up and sneak out and dance in this seemingly endless rich party world they have discovered. Is this what happened to the elder sisters, and who or what is bumping them all off? Talking about putting books off, Kim Bannerman's vampire dystopia Aeterna was next to get ticked off my NetGalley ARC list, and this was another surprise because I really enjoyed it. So this one is about the lives of top tier vampires and their lives underground and how opulent and extra their lives were. But one vampire, Marcus, wanted to know more. Bored by the endless art, blood on tap and pleasure houses being the part of the vampire elite, life was dull, 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 and he wanted more. Marcus hangs out in the human cloning labs with his friends, and often in the mushroom farms even further down below the surface. So I should explain, the clone labs are how they get the blood on tap in the huge human factories, and the mushroom farms is how they nourish the clones. The vampire families are the vampires that were made by one powerful person, mostly back when they all lived above the surface on Earth. Since then, the vampires became the soul of Earth's population, and they decided it was just safer all round if they went underground and took their world somewhat upside down. I hope that makes sense. And Marcus is part of the family that is ruling that world right now. But it is coming up for election time, so they're going to have what is called a bloodlet, which is a bit of a hunt above ground where a whole bunch of clones are let loose with the family's best hunters, and between the hours of darkness, whoever kills the most clones wins. Sounds simple? No. It would be if there wasn't scheming and underhandedness afoot. When we meet the clones going above ground, we are introduced to a clone who isn't just a fleshy zombie. She is Bo, and she is aware of what is happening, and little by little she is remembering her old life. so she hides and fights back. Marcus is the lucky hunter put forward to fight on behalf of his family, partly because he wants to see the above ground and partly because he wants to prove his worth. But he is more than just a blood-hungry, violent vampire, and when it comes time for him to rip out the neck of a human, he just can't do it. He has been used to drinking the free-flowing blood, watching the humans in the labs and feeling rather sorry for them, and doesn't particularly like the violence associated with the old vampire ways. And this turns out to be his saving grace, because the bloodlet is sabotaged and Marcus is left above ground to die when the gate to the underground world has been locked. What would be Marcus's downfall in a real bloodlet might just have saved his life. Dead Man's Grave by Neil Lancaster was another advanced copy I was given by NetGalley in order to review it, and this was a pretty good read. It was very police procedural heavy though, so if that's your kind of drama, you're gonna love this. Set in Glasgow, Scotland, and the head of the most prolific gangster family, the Hardys, has gone missing. Old and dying of cancer, he was last seen leaving to look at a grave of one of his ancestors, and they obviously had to report him missing when their own investigation turned up empty. And so we meet Craigie, a former army soldier, now a detective sergeant, still suffering regularly from PTSD, and his freshly appointed partner DS Calder, who just wants to finish her shift on time so she can go on a date that she's endlessly cancelling. This leads them to historical family feuds, cover-ups by one of the team on the payroll of the gangsters, and dead ends. Craigie is a die-hard copper, straight as an arrow, and he just won't be sidelined, even if it means bending the truth himself in order to find out who is the bent copper and what really happened to Tam Hardy. Like I said, it was procedural heavy, and if you just took some of that out, I would have loved it a little bit more, but I found it a little bit repetitive. But still worth a read if you love cops.
Why are you so sweaty?
I was watching Cops.
Penultimately, I chose a random book from my library audio selection while I was waiting for the one I wanted to become available, and I picked The Confessions of Frannie Langton by Sara Collins, purely based on the front cover. I know we're told as children that we shouldn't do it, but we all do it, don't lie. And what a front cover! Gorgeous! So this is about a slave black woman, Frannie, in 1826 London, who was a bit of a novelty because she could read and was remarkably clever. But back then, a clever slave was crafty and cunning, a dangerous combination for any woman. Frannie Langton tells her story in various timelines, but predominantly told from the courtroom during her trial at the Old Bailey for the murder of her madame and master. It tells the story of how she came to be in service in London from the plantation in Jamaica, where she was taught to read, to the laudanum-soaked days when she fell in love with her madame. The book was a middle-of-the-road story of blame, and I suppose it is unfair for me to review it since it wasn't something particularly I wanted to read, but it passed the time before I was able to listen to Stardust by Neil Gaiman. This was a full cast recording, and I think this added to my love of it. Obviously, I am a fan. No, that wouldn't be fair. I watch this film way too often to be a mere fan. This is my regular viewing to have on when I can't find The Hobbit on Prime or Netflix, but when I just want to lie down on the sofa and vegetate. You know, the kind of comfort film where you know all the words and know exactly the scene by listening with your eyes closed. But I have never read the book, and in fact, up until recently, I owned 3 copies of this book. But I had heard this was one of those rare unicorns of a film being better. But now I have my own opinion, and I wouldn't say better per se. I would say that the book was the bare bones and the film added the meat and the organs. Technically, all the information is there in the book with only a few differences, such as the beginning tells more of a tale of Tristan's father and how Tristan had a stepmother and a brother, unlike the film. So, if you've been put off by the countless warnings that the book is not worth a read, I say nay, nay. It will add to your love of the whole world of War, Stormhold and Fairy, and I can highly recommend the full cast version of the audio book. It is shorter because there's no he said angrily and she stated, and at 2.5 hours it positively flies by. If you don't know the story, let me tell you, every 9 years a fairy market is held beyond the English village of Wall, so called because of the wall that divides the two worlds. Dunstan Thorne ventures into the market from Wall and he meets Una, who sells him a glass snowdrop in exchange for a kiss, and maybe a little more because 9 months later a baby is left at the wall with a note for Dunstan. Cut to 18 years later and we meet a grown Tristan, Dunstan's son, who is madly in love with the local beauty Victoria, who is walking home one evening when they see a falling star, which, if Tristan brings the star back to her, she will marry him, and so begins Tristan's adventures over the wall. Meanwhile, in Stormhold, a king lies dying with his sons all fighting to succeed him. The king throws a pendant out of the window for one of them to retrieve and therefore be the new king. But as the pendant flies through the air, it knocks the falling star off track and now the star has the pendant. What ensues is a magical fairy tale with traditional goodies and baddies, witches and sky pirates, and a race against time to A, get the fallen star, and B, find the successor of Stormhold. So that's it. Those were the 8 books I read in July, but what were my top 3? Play the music. At number 3, it was the vampire dystopian thriller Aeterna by Kim Bannerman, the newest release on my list. Almost made it. It was number 2, Stardust by Neil Gaiman, the star-studded magical audiobook that on another month might have been number 1. But how could it not be its number 1? House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig. The moody, gothic, dark fairy tale. It was definitely a mood for sure. I felt like a goth just reading it. It was amazing. I just slotted right in among the pages. Perfection for the ominous heat of the summer. The damp, salty story cooled me down. But what was the biggest surprise? Drum roll, please. I'm going to give this to Aeterna Again by Kim Bannerman, and I'll tell you why. I always think I know the stories of vampires and there's not much that can be added to their tales, but this really surprised me. It was different, it was unusual, and I heartily recommend it if you fancy it. I was regretting requesting it, but I was pleasantly surprised. So, if you like a vampire book and you're fed up of reading the same old story over and over, you should give this one a go. That is it. July is well and truly wrapped up. Thank you all so much for watching. I am always so grateful that you do. Like and subscribe if you want to. What did you read last month that amazed you the most? Have I managed to sell some fairy tales and vampires to you? I believe Neil Gaiman was right when he wrote, "Anyone who believes what a cat tells him deserves all he gets." Until next time, bye bye.